We started Daniel last week, and we're going to try and go a little faster than we have in the past. And we saw that Daniel suffered terribly as a result of his nation's sins. You know, God brings judgment on nations to preserve them, actually. It's in the same reason that a parent will bring judgment in the form of discipline, physical discipline to the child. Why? To preserve them. To get them to realize you can't live in foolishness. You can't go play in the street. You can't stay out until all hours of the night. You shouldn't be doing drugs. You shouldn't, because of all the destruction that happens to people's lives. Well, God does the same thing. He brings judgment to his people Israel, and as a result, Daniel, a guy who loved God, suffered. But he purposed in his heart, even in the midst of suffering, he purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the things that the king's delights, pleasures, or the world's pleasures. And as a result, God gave him great wisdom. So we want wisdom, delight yourself in God. Turn away from the world, delight yourself in God, get serious about him, and God will give you wisdom. And so this week we're going to see that Daniel reveals Nebuchadnezzar's dream. We read the lead up to the dream, and we're going to read about the dream, Nebuchadnezzar's dream, who was the king of Babylon, a dictator like no dictator before him. He set the standard of dictators, we're going to see. And Daniel's going to give the dream and the interpretation. And then we're going to see, if we get into chapter 3, which is my hope, we're going to see that Nebuchadnezzar finds out, he realizes this was God. God's telling me, when I was thinking about what the future is going to be after after my kingdom is set up, God is telling me I'm going to be replaced by another country, and that country is going to be replaced by another one, and that one by another one. And what does he do? He rebels by making a statue that's different than God's dream, God's vision that he gave him, and make it all of gold instead of being replacement. So we're going to see Daniel knows up here what God has told him, but then in his heart rebels against it. Isn't that the way a lot of people are in the world today? They grew up in the church, they know the things about Jesus, they know what the Bible says, they might even know the books of the Bible and everything else, but they never get it into their heart. I hope everybody here has it in your heart, because that's where it's got to be. Yes?
You said Daniel rebelled. You mean Nebuchadnezzar?
Yeah, I didn't mean Daniel rebelled. Yeah, Nebuchadnezzar rebelled. Nebuchadnezzar rebelled against the vision that God had given him, the dream that God had given him. In fact, I really love it when you guys point that out, because it makes it easier for the editors to edit this out. So, and I'm going to try not to say David instead of Daniel this week too. But anyway, and I wanted to say last week that one thing I had noticed, or I failed to notice in the past, maybe other people, maybe you picked it up, but Daniel's brought in, trained for 3 years to be a wise man. He's a foreigner. So Nebuchadnezzar has other wise men, astrologers, soothsayers, crystal ball gazers, everything else. He has his wise men. But he imports these Jews to be his wise men. And when he interviews all the wise men, he finds Daniel to be 10 times smarter than all the other guys. But then what I missed before, it's amazing how you can read the Bible so many times and you miss something, which is why we should keep reading it. What I missed before is that when Nebuchadnezzar is bringing in the people, say, hey, I had a dream, and I want you to interpret, and they go, okay, King, just tell us what the dream is. And he goes, no, I want you to tell me what the dream is and its interpretation. They go crazy. No king asks anybody to do this. We can't know your dream. And what we need to understand is Daniel's not there when that dialogue is happening, because Daniel is finding out about it from the head of the eunuchs. Daniel goes, what's the deal? Why is everybody getting killed? So now, and this is what I failed to realize before, Nebuchadnezzar knew this Jewish boy was 10 times smarter than everybody else. Who should he have asked first if he had a dream? If he's going to ask something that no king has ever asked of anybody ever before, who would you get? You're 10 times smarter guy, unless he's a Christian or a Jew or somebody else. Isn't that the way it is in the world today? That people reject it. You might not get hired for a job because you're a Christian. You might not be esteemed by the world because you're a Christian. You might be a great biologist that has been able to prove in the laboratory that there is dinosaur soft tissue that's here from these supposedly 60 million year old fossils of dinosaurs, and that's impossible for that tissue to be soft and for those cells to still be there, and yet you are fired from the university because you have wisdom that's not allowed. And so then it's only in desperation, really, that the king wants to know, and nobody can tell, that he brings Daniel in. So Daniel chapter 2, verse 19. So Daniel hears that the other wise men who were before Nebuchadnezzar could not answer Nebuchadnezzar's request that they give him, what is the dream and the interpretation. So the edict goes out to kill everybody, including Daniel. And Daniel says, hey, tell King Nebuchadnezzar that just give me some time and I'll seek God. And then it says in verse 19, then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his, and he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. We covered this last week, but because it's so important, and I just felt in listening to the study, I wanted to be a little bit more embellishing on this, because it's important, especially the way people view God. Is it God's will that nations destroy nations? No. Does it fit into his plan? Yes. That's kind of a hard thing to balance out, because it was God's will that Adam and Eve would never sin. Because God doesn't will people to rebel against him. He can't will sin. He's holy. He can't even think sin. But it was his will to give us choice. So why are there wars? Why is Babylon coming and destroying Israel? Why are we having the wars that we have today? James tells us it's not because it's God's will that it would happen. In James 4, verse 1, it says, where do wars and fights come from among you? Do they not come from your desires for pleasures that war in your members? You lust and you do not have. You murder and covet and cannot obtain. You fight and war, yet you do not have because you do not ask. See, the Bible says that all wars, all conflicts, all disaster are coming because of our own sinful ways as human beings. But, see, God stands outside of time. He's like a sphere of infinite knowledge and awareness. And inside that sphere is a timeline of human beings. And it was his will to create human beings to be able to respond to his love for them by them loving him. But in doing that, he had to allow man to say no. He had to allow a way for man to rebel. And so then he's just watching that timeline, and he knows man's propensity is to sin. In fact, at the end of flooding the world, he had to flood the entire world, destroy all souls on earth except for 8 people on Noah, Noah and his family. And at the end, when they land, he goes, I'm never going to destroy the earth along with man ever again like this. There's going to be seasons and winter and summer and sun and moon until the end. I'm not going to ever destroy the world. Well, that means he's brought discipline to the world. He allows sinfulness to go, a rebellion and sinfulness, and then he'll discipline that country. How did he do that? By shortly after the flood, man is uniting to rebel against God again. It would have destroyed the whole world again, like Noah. So what did God do? He confused the languages of the people to separate and scatter them. So this language goes here, that language goes there. And now if one nation wants to rebel against God, there's other God-fearing people that can come and put an end to it. And he orchestrates who rises up and who comes down so that he can accomplish the saving of man. See, God's will is to save us, and his plan of who rises to power and who comes down from power is all fitting into a plan for us to be rescued. And, so you say Nebuchadnezzar, who is a ruthless dictator, idol worshiper of Babylonian gods. But he came and he disciplined Israel, used by God for that. And, there's so many ways you can look at how God used Nebuchadnezzar. He uses Nebuchadnezzar in my life to read about how he ends up getting saved. And in his ruthlessness, he used Hitler. As I said, Kevin, look at what happened. Well, Hitler allowed the Jews to become a nation again. And God prophesied that it would be so because God saw that it would be so. He saw what was going to happen in the aftermath of World War II and how a miracle would happen that in one day that the nation of Israel would be declared, and boom, one day it became a nation, just like the last chapter of Isaiah said it would. And people would say that was impossible. How could it be possible that a people becomes a nation in one day? They do it by conquering and all this. And God, in his orchestration of history, allowing the history of man and their interactions, it happened in one day. Even though 5 Arab nations invaded it the next day to try and annihilate it, and it didn't happen. And then I mentioned last week, and I saw some people looking at me strange, and when I listened to it, I was going, people are going to think I thought Obama was president last week, and I wasn't saying that. What I was trying to say is that Christians, God-fearing people, had a hard time with the 8 years of the Obama presidency. Why? Because unlike all other presidents, he more than any led the nation into calling evil good and good evil, more than any president before us. And we had a problem with, how could this happen? God, why have you allowed this to happen? Why the corruption and everything else? Well, we're corrupt because we're a corrupt nation. We have our own discipline issues that are coming our way. And because the people love to have it so. Jeremiah even said, this is a terrible thing. The prophets prophesy falsely, the priests rule by their own power, and the worst part, and the people love to have it so. And look around today. The people of America don't want to be God-fearing. They don't want the God of the Bible. And so evil becomes, what the Bible defines as evil was declared to be good for 8 years. What the Bible declares to be good was declared to be evil for those 8 years. And then Trump, and again, not a stellar example of virtue, but God is using him and many people are thinking this, that his stance on the nation of Israel is fitting into God's plan to fulfill his prophecies on Israel. The declaration of Jerusalem to be the capital of the Jewish state is just a huge thing. It wouldn't have happened by any other politician that's ever run for office. It just wouldn't have. It took this guy that, because of all that Trump is, for some reason, he has decided, maybe because of his relations, with his children and everything else, but something has convicted him to do something that God has ordained to happen, because God ordained that is his city. He says, that city is my city, and I give it to the Jews. And besides that, in the last days, all of the nations of the world are going to be fighting over that city. And so God saw it already. God saw all the lead up of and President Obama basically set the stage for what's about to happen in the Middle East. See, again, God raises up, because I know what this vessel will do. He will corrupt and set up the stage for what's going to happen. And I'm going to show, when God shows himself strong on behalf of the Jewish people in the coming war, according to the Bible, the whole world is going to go, whoa, there's a God of Israel. There's a God of Israel that watches over his people. And see, God's into that because he wants people to have a fear of him and to come to him and to come to repentance and to realize that he's real and he's not like Buddha and he's not like the Hindu doctrines. He is the real God of the Bible, and see, God's going to be cool with that. And I'm cool with that. So, and I say all this to help us to understand. I know people that will be freaked out if Trump gets removed or whatever. We shouldn't be, right? Because this verse says, God raises up, God takes down, he's in control. We're going to have to realize that the Lord Jesus knows nothing can happen to you apart from God allowing permission. God watches over you. God watches over countries. Nothing's going to happen. It's not like he's sleeping and he wakes up and he goes, oh, what happened? It's not like the captain on that one ship that got creamed. He wakes up to the fact that his ship has just been hit and he doesn't even know what's. Jesus doesn't wake. He doesn't slumber or sleep. He knows what's happening, and we need to just be at peace on those things. So going to verse 26, the king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, according to their God's names, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. You called them in first, and they said they couldn't figure it out. So is that really what's happening, king? Because There is a God, verse 28, in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed are these. So, that's basically up till now. We're repeating a little bit of what we did last week, but going to verse 29, as for you, O king, the thoughts came to your mind while on your bed about what would come to pass after this, and he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. And so Daniel says, I'll even go before the dream. I'll tell you why you had the dream. You were going to bed at night and just going, I'm awesome. I conquered the Egyptians. I conquered the Jews. I've conquered the world. I reigned from Iraq all the way down to Egypt. And what's going to happen next? That's what you were thinking. You go to bed and you have a dream. And the dream was, verse 30 actually, but as for me, this secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes who make known the interpretation of the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. God gave me this for two reasons. Not because I'm super smart, because nobody's smart enough to know somebody's dream. You can't possibly be smart enough. It takes God telling you. And he goes, two reasons. One, to save our lives. God decided to save Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel. And number two, God actually wants you to know. And why did God want him to know? Because by him knowing, we're reading what he knew, and we see that it still applies to future to us, for us. So he said, God wants to reveal it to you so that people in Port Orchard, Washington in 2018, end of April 2018, would know what lies ahead for us. And the people between Daniel's time and us have been knowing from this vision how things would apply to them. Verse 31, you, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floor. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. And a stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is the dream. Now we will tell the interpretation of it before the king. And we're going to have a detailed interpretation from Daniel, but he actually leaves a little bit out from, it's implied in here, but the threshing floor issue is, imagine this image. And if, I could do a PowerPoint here, but why? I could tell you just Google the Nebuchadnezzar's image, and you'll see him. And look, there's dozens of them, and the image of the dream. But the one you want to see is where something comes down and just smashes the feet, and the image is collapsing, because that's what this is saying. And this is what basically, I'll just give you where we're going to go, and then we're going to go there. Nebuchadnezzar, you're the head of gold of that image. Then your nation's going to be replaced by chest of silver. That nation's going to be replaced by a belly of bronze. That nation's going to be replaced by iron legs that go down, and at the very end of the legs are going to be these feet that are mixed with clay, iron and clay. It's going to be different. And there's going to be 10 toes of that, the 10 toes of the image, mixed with iron clay, partly strong, partly weak. And at the time of those kings, those 10 kings at the end, God is going to send a rock. The rock, who's the rock in the Old Testament? King Jesus. The rock followed him in the wilderness. The rock that opened the split and gave them water. There's all, again, you should read the Bible if you don't know what I'm talking about. Go through the Bible. The rock is Jesus. Rock followed him in the wilderness. And And the rock that God sends, and we recently studied Psalm 2, because kiss the Son, because he's coming in his wrath. Psalm 110, same thing. Come and sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool, and then the wrath of God is going to come down. These are all the images representing all of men's attempts to rule the world that affect the Middle East and the nation of Israel. And not so clear here in this chapter, but in chapter 7, where there's a repeat vision that Daniel has, where it gets even more specific, it says this final empire, it's going to be the whole world. And that final empire it so impacts Daniel that he becomes sick, because this is such a vicious that final beast is so high. God, I want to know about that last one, because it is so powerful to destroy, and the man in charge of it is a blasphemer, and he's given power over the saints to kill all the saints. God, tell me about that. And at the time of that final beast and the final leader of that 10-nation, 10-head empire, the Messiah comes and destroys them. And so then Jesus comes. He puts an end to all of man's attempts to rule the world apart from him. He destroys it. And that whole beast, the dictatorship, the Medo-Persians came and brought rule by law. The Greeks came to bring rule by language and customs and the way they get along that way. And the iron legs of Rome brought Pax Romana, Roman peace, peace by the sword. We're going to control you by an overwhelming military capability, down to the end, iron mixed with clay, which we'll get into. And that all of man's ways to rule, which are still in existence today, there's dictators today, there's people that want to just rule by law, there's all this other stuff. It's all going to be dealt with when Jesus comes, puts an end to all of that, and sets up his kingdom that will never pass away. And and everything else is going to be like chaff. Everything that was not in submission to Jesus will be like chaff and just beaten and blown away to never be seen again. Aren't you glad it's never to be seen again? Nations in rebellion against God. That's where we're going with this. And so, because it is kind of confusing, I thought, tell you where we're going, then let's look at it. O King, you, O King, are King of kings. Verse 37. For the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of the heaven, he has given them into your hand and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. You are King Bwana. You rule like nobody else has ruled on earth. And Daniel 5:18, we'll get to there sometime. This is Daniel just telling Nebuchadnezzar's son or grandson. Some people think it meant grandson. He's rebuking him just before the night before the Medo-Persians come in and destroy Babylon. In that night, O King, the Most High God, King Belshazzar, who is going to be ruling after Nebuchadnezzar, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar, your father, a kingdom in majesty, glory, and honor. And because of the majesty that he gave him, all peoples, nations, language trembled and feared before him. Whomever he wished, he executed. Whomever he wished, he kept alive. Whomever he wished, he set up. And whomever he wished, he put down. You're the head of gold because you rule. Nebuchadnezzar could just say, you know what, I don't like you. Somebody comes in and says, could I just get can I get a week pass on my taxes this week? I'll pay you more next week. You know what? Just the fact you asked me, you're dead. And they're dead. Everybody in the country just lived in total fear of the power of this dictator that was able to rule over all this territory. Anything that bothered him, he could just say, you can live and you can die. As an example of his ruthlessness, you can go to 2 Kings 25. We're not going to go there. But when he took Daniel in 605 BC, he took Daniel and other wise men to Babylon, and he left the king of Israel still there. He made a new king. He said, okay, now you're king, and you listen to me. As long as you listen to me and you do what I say, everything's okay. Well, two kings down, rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar. He goes, okay, that's it. Nebuchadnezzar brought his army, totally destroyed and burned Jerusalem, destroyed it. Well, the king and his sons, King Zedekiah and his sons, oh, we have this secret way of getting through the wall. We're going to get away. So they leave. They get away. Nebuchadnezzar sends his troops to chase him down, find him. They bring Zedekiah and his sons in front of King Nebuchadnezzar. And King Nebuchadnezzar says, yep, shouldn't have done that. Shouldn't have rebelled. And so he kills all of his, he goes, I'm going to let you see your sons get killed. Then he kills all of his sons. And then he goes, but I don't want to kill you. I want you to think about the last thing you saw was your sons being killed, so I'm going to put your eyes out. And so then he puts his eyes out and says, okay, come to Babylon. You get to sit in Babylon just thinking the last thing you saw was me killing your children. That's how ruthless he was. You can read about that. He was the head of gold. Now, I want to emphasize throughout this study, because commentators that think that the kingdom that came and put an end to Rome was the church, and that the church is that rock that has come and changed the world. And some of the commentators go, but wait a second, why, when it's crushing this image, Babylon was already gone by the time the Romans, so why is the whole image coming down? Why isn't it just it just got the feet? Well, there is dictatorship mindset in governments to this day. There are ruling by law that we're going to see is the next one, and all these other ones. And God puts an end to all of it. And the final world empire is going to be a mixture of everything. The Antichrist is going to be a dictator like Nebuchadnezzar. He's going to be able to say, you bow and worship to this image of me. That's what the Antichrist is going to say. He's going to make all the inhabitants of the world bow to an image of himself. And if they do not bow to the image, they will be hunted down and killed in the tribulation period. It'll be just like Nebuchadnezzar. So when Jesus comes to take out the kingdom of the Antichrist, he's taking out all the different forms of man trying to rule apart from God, because that's going to be the mixture in the last days. The mixture is going to be everything that's been tried in the past. But after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours. Why? And it's not named here, but in chapter 7, it's actually named what comes after Babylon. It's the Medo-Persians. The Iranians conquered the Babylonians in one night, as we were reading in the chapter of Daniel. And while they were partying, the Babylonians are partying behind their thick walls, but the Persians figured out a way to divert the river, and they were able to get under the walls and slaughter all the army, the drunken army, in the night. Another good reason not to be drunk. You never know when somebody's going to break into your house. But after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours. How was it inferior? Well, because the Medo-Persians, Cyrus, Darius, some people say, they were not dictators. They couldn't do whatever they wanted to do. They were under the control of law. How do we know this? The book of Esther was the Medo-Persian Empire. And Haman tricked Ahasuerus into making an edict, go on this day, everybody in the Medo-Persian kingdom can go kill whatever Jews you want to kill on this day. And then when Ahasuerus finds out that Haman tricked him into doing this against the Jews, then he realized, I can't do anything. I'm king, but I can't undo the law of the Medes and the Persians. So the next attempt was, we don't want dictators, we want law. We want to make law and law rules. No one is above the law. Ever heard that before? It used to apply to America, doesn't anymore. But no one was above the law. Then a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over the earth. Again, not named here, but in chapter 7, it's the Greeks. What did the Greeks bring? Language and culture. Alexander the Great swept, he just conquered the world so quick. He was done by the time he was 32 years old and then died. And he said, everybody's going to speak Greek. Everybody is going to have the Greek culture. Worship of gods. Whatever gods you want to worship, you just worship whatever gods. This is what the Greeks are going to bring. Greek gods, Roman gods, whatever you believe, as long as you don't say you're an exclusive religion. And so he brought that and ruled the world for a short time. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, and as much as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. So the fourth kingdom is not named anywhere. The Bible doesn't say Rome anywhere. Commentators just look at history. Hey, we saw the history of Babylon. We know the history. They were followed by the Medo-Persians. We know that they were followed by the Greeks. And we know the Greeks were followed by the Romans. So even though Daniel doesn't mention it, we're going to say it's the Roman Empire. But I think there was a reason why God didn't name it Rome. And that is because Rome has kind of continued till now, but not in the name of Rome. Rome was really not conquered and taken over. It took a lot of it into what exists to this day as the Western world. The Congress, the Senate, the House, the Caesars and whatever else. It's just kind of existed in the time since Rome, the last 2,000 years. So that's why, and some people say that's why it's the long legs. The long legs of iron, where what ruled is Pax Romana, peace by the tip of the Roman sword. Who rules? The one that has the biggest army, the one that has the best catapults, the ones that have, back in those days, now it's best fighters, more nukes, whatever else. It's the fear. The world is ruled by the fear of the sword, the fear of military conquest. And then verse 41, whereas you saw the feet and toes partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. And some people even see the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, breaking up into the east and west as being the reason for the two legs. And again, there's lots of speculations, lots of ideas. I don't know which one is true, but I want to look at it more big picture. It's talking about the history of the world all the way till Jesus comes, because that's the rock that comes. And I think we're in this fifth, which is an extension of the fourth, and that is that it says it's partly of potter's clay, partly of iron. It's going to be divided. It shall be partly strong, partly weak. And it's going to have the iron, which is what? Again, rule. It's the ruling the world by the power of the sword. And that is it exists today. It's going to continue to exist. But what is the world really trying to do today? And they'll even say it. The European Union, one of their government buildings is designed. The architect designed it in the form of the Tower of Babel. Why did he do that? Why is the European Commission headquarters a Tower of Babel? And you can Google on undoing the Tower of Babel and read articles that were in Time magazine and everything else talking about how because of technology that we as a culture are going to be undoing the Babel effect. We're going to be unifying in language. And today, English is pretty much the universal language, like Alexander the Great tried to create with Greek. But even for people that don't speak, what are people all over the world able to do now with the technology and the cell phones? Everything is getting translated. You can speak into your phone English and have it speak Russian or Mexican or Spanish or whatever else out to somebody else, where the technology is unifying the world. The fact that we have satellite communications that allow people in Europe to know what happens here in America in just a matter of minutes. A news item over here is spread over the whole world. We are becoming like one. And not only that, you look at the globalist thinkers, the ones that want us to globalize. They want to bring about global peace by having us all be one family, because if we're all one family, we're not going to try and kill each other. That's what they think is the utopia that they want to bring to the world. And so what do you have to do that? Well, you have to mix everybody up. Let's open the border with Mexico. Let's open the border with Canada. Let's open the border in the Middle East and Europe and all these other places that the haves of Europe, the haves of America, we need to bring them down and let the have-nots come in so that we can make a level playing field so that everybody can just have the same. And there's people, there's elitists who are talking about what we need to do is eliminate the entire current economic system and give birth to a new economic system where everybody receives the living wage. Have you heard about this? They're talking about it at the elite levels. That you basically, and you can go work and do what you want, as we require you to do to keep the sustainability of our society. Somebody has to go do roads. Somebody has to build cars. We're going to make you have to go do that, but everybody is going to get a living wage. It's universal communism. But when you think about it, you try and make it all one, you try and mix iron and clay, we're going to make you do this, or we're going to come get you with the sword, and you can make it happen, but it's weak, isn't it? It's not unified. You know, people when God caused the Tower of Babel, he took the different languages and cultures and everything, and they liked hanging around with each other, and they always considered the other person that's bringing in their gods and their attitudes and their culture. There was always a little bit of a conflict, so we kind of stayed separate for all these centuries until now. And it's bringing a conflict. Europe is in a tizzy. There's conflict because they're trying to force mix us. So it's going to end. Daniel 7 says this last one, or verse 42. And as the toes, how many toes on your foot? 10. And then you have Revelation and everybody else talking about 10 heads, 10 horns, 10 horns, 10, there's 10 kings in the last days, 10 nation world empire. And the toes, the feet, are partly of iron, partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. And we see that the Antichrist, the book of Daniel, talks about how the Antichrist, he's ruling, he's the ultimate dictator, he's in control of the whole world, but then an uprising happens over here and he has to go deal with them. The Battle of Armageddon is associated with 200 million man army coming from the east, and he's having to deal with his soldiers, so it's like he's going to try and rule. The elitists are going to try and create this utopia, but it's just too big. It's too big for them to pull off. And there's going to be cataclysms as a result. Again, I'm not making up that their plan is to make a 10-nation empire. Club of Rome, you can Google the Club of Rome map of the world. I got a map that was exactly like the Club of Rome map that I had gotten back in the 80s from a friend of mine on the European Commission website, the European Commission in the world. It showed a map where it's all boiled down, the 190 plus nations are boiled down to 10 nations, where we are shown as the North American Union, and it's Canada, America, and Mexico. That is the reason why it is so hard to fix our border. The plan is to erase the border. And the plan is not a Democrat plan. It's not a Republican plan. It's a plan of people at a higher level than the Republicans and Democrats, and those elites use their power over our legislators to try and accomplish this goal. And it's why Trump is only going to be a speed bump in the road. That wall is going to just be a hiccup in history. It's not going to happen because of what the Word of God says. The nations are going to be unified in the last days. As you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. So who's they? A lot of discussion about they. You saw iron mixed with ceramic clay. They will mingle with the seed of men. Well, the idea is that the two that make the most sense to me is it's talking about the forced immigration diversity. That they are going to make them mingle the seeds of men. The wording doesn't really support that. It more supports the idea that there's going to be another. It's happened before in history. We covered this in our Genesis 6 study about the flood that we did recently in in our Wednesday night studies. You can go back. We're up to flood 3 now. Do flood 1. The reason why God had to flood the world is because the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and Nephilim, children were born to them, and they were Nephilim. That there is going to be a demonic invasion where demons will actually come and deceive mankind, to come among us, to deceive us, to say they beam down, and they're here to show us what we need for global peace. And there's strong biblical evidence for that. It says in the book of Daniel later on, it says that the Antichrist will not consider the God of his fathers or the desire of women, but will only honor fortresses, military power, and the one who gives him that power. And it says that the inhabitants of the world are going to worship the Antichrist and the devil who gives them his power. There's going to be apparently a demonic invasion. And you sit there, and I know it sounds crazy. It sounds crazy to me, except for the Bible implies that it's so. And there's evidence that it's happened in times past on this planet. And there's going to be the forces of hell are going to be opened up and allowed to invade this world. And they're going to mingle with the seed of men and deceive them. I think we're going to be gone for that, so if that makes you feel better. and here's another thing. We were talking about this at the men's breakfast yesterday. I grew up, I'm old enough to grow up in the cartoon times of Dick Tracy. How many of you gray-hairs remember Dick Tracy? How did Dick Tracy communicate with headquarters? Went like this and talked to his phone, or talked to his watch phone. Back then, secretaries, switchboard operators were still pulling cords out of and sticking them in. Oh, you want to talk to so-and-so? Here. That was the technology when Dick Tracy came out. And now it's there. It's like, how in the world? It's almost like our scripting of comic books, movies, dramas, everything else over the years maybe there's a spiritual inspiration that is happening at that level to prepare and condition us for things that are coming. How could somebody have thought speaking to a phone when all they know is the technology of the time? Unless somebody, hey, you know what, I think I'll make a cartoon where a guy speaks into his phone, and the devil goes, yeah, do that, because, I got that planned for a few decades from now. Everything that men have imagined back then is coming true today. And what have we been bombarded with since the 60s? Since the 60s, we have been bombarded with show after show, blockbuster after blockbuster, billions of dollars worth of ticket sales programming people for the fact the aliens are going to come and they're going to help us, they're going to hurt us. There's the Klingons and the good guys and the bad guys, and they're all out there. And you know what? There's been polls taken about how many people think that's all reality, and they're all ready for it. They think it's true. And it is going to be true. They're not going to be coming from the Andromeda galaxy. They're just going to shift from being in the spiritual dimension into the physical dimension and come and say, we are here to help you. Worship the Antichrist. Don't listen to those Christians, those narrow-minded haters about Jesus. That has all been a deception that has caused you to keep from seeing that you are God yourself. You need to look at the God within. And we're here to help you restore your Christ consciousness so that you can be entering in the new age of Aquarius. That's what they'll say. They're going to mingle with men and do things that are going to deceive the masses of the world. Amen in that it's going to happen, but bummer for the people that are here deceived. And in the days of these kings, in the days when the world has 10 toes, 10 kings, partly strong, partly weak, the days of the very end of human history, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. The days of these kings, I think, are days future to us. And again, if you just read these verses in Daniel, you can be like the commentators of Daniel, and they just say, oh, this is the church that's slowly taking over with the gospel that's going to take over the kingdom, and it's going to ultimately win over all the souls of the earth to believe in Jesus, and everything's going to be okay. That's what they think. If you only have Daniel, you can go ahead and say that. But we got Daniel, we got Psalm 2 that we've already covered, Psalm 110 that we've covered, we've got Daniel chapter 7, 9, Revelation 12, 13, 17, and 19. No. We have apostasy that's coming. We have the world rejecting Jesus in the end. We have hardly anybody believing when Jesus comes back and he comes and destroys the kingdoms of this world that are at enmity with God and sets up his kingdom, which will never be destroyed. And that is, wow, encouraging, isn't it? Stand forever. Inasmuch as you saw that the stone was cut out of a mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, the gold. The great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this, after your kingdom. You went to bed saying, what's going to happen after me? Well, I'll tell you for the next few thousand years. This is what's going to happen. Yeah, you're going to be replaced, King Nebuchadnezzar, with another kingdom, another kingdom, another kingdom, and then God's going to set up his kingdom. That's going to destroy all kingdoms, including yours, and then he's going to set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. That's what you ask for? That's what you get to know. And then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrate, before Daniel, and commanded that they should present an offering and incense to him. What is he saying? Let's go ahead and make an offering and incense to this God. Daniel is kind of what he's trying to do. The king answered Daniel and said, truly, your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret. Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. Also Daniel petitioned the king and set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king. So, do you think Nebuchadnezzar's saved now? No, he's not. But he knows. See, the thing is, it's what's so crazy is he knows that Daniel's God is God. He knows that there is no other God. Imagine him. He sits there and goes, as Daniel's telling him the dream, he's sitting there, how could this kid, he's 18 years old, how could this kid tell me my dream and the interpretation and everything that's happening? He would have been just overwhelmed, and this is it, and I'm going to put you in charge of everybody. But he didn't put God in charge of his life. And today, again, as I emphasize, there's so many churchgoers, so many people. They know the Bible. They know the memory verses. They know John 3:16, and yet they want to reject the very truths of the gospel of Jesus Christ. When it comes down to it, when it comes down to people asking them, do you have to believe in Jesus? And they say, no, you don't have to. How can you say that? How can you say that you don't have to believe in Jesus to be saved? How can you believe there's people that are decades-long churchgoers that are now saying that there's no hell? How can you say that there's no hell? You're calling Jesus a liar. How could people do that? The answer is, it's here. It's not here. And how do we know for sure? Daniel chapter 3. We're going to quickly go through this. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits, and he set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So now he's got an entire image that he's put up in Dura, and it's a big, huge image that everybody's going to have to bow down to. And what different metals are involved there? All gold. See, Daniel just got done telling him, you're a head of gold, and that vision then switched to silver, and then switched to bronze, and then switched to iron. And Nebuchadnezzar going, nope, not on my watch. It's going to be all gold, and it's me, and you worship me. Isn't it funny how dictators, they want to be worshiped? And they can't stand it when people don't worship them and bow to them. You have Pol Pot of Cambodia. You have all these, Mao Zedong, Hitler. You got to say Heil Hitler. You got to have his image in your office. See, people that are inspired by Satan or just inspired by the world, they're so full of themselves. Whereas people that have that are full of Jesus, they're so death to self and humble. Yesterday there was a short news clip of some guys that were being, their prospects for the football draft. I could only listen to two of them because the first two were just all, yeah, I'm going to get drafted pretty good because of my intellect and because of my 60-yard football arm and, and stuff. And the next guy goes, yeah, and I'm there because I'm the quickest, I'm the this. It's just our fallen nature. We're just so full of ourselves. Oh, we got to give it up. Go to verse 4. Then a herald cried aloud. He makes this image, and then everybody comes, and has to bow to the image. And the herald cried out aloud, "To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, language, that at the time that you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre of psaltery and symphony, with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of the fiery burning furnace," because they worship the fire god, so they make that's going to be the punishment the fire god's going to get you. So at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, and symphony with all kinds of music, all the people, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Why did they do that? They wanted to save their skin. Again, he's the dictator. And he says, I have to bow down and worship the image or I die. So let's all go worship the image. Same thing is going to happen with an Antichrist. People will be forbidden to buy and sell if they don't. But it goes on to say, verse 8, therefore at that time certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. Why? Because if you go to verse 12, you find out there are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the prophets of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up. They refuse to bow. Now don't miss something here. How many Jews are being chastised here? 3. How many Jews are in Babylon at the time? Tens of thousands. Tens of thousands of Jews are being, actually because later on by 586 there's tens of thousands. So now, however many he's brought, there's probably hundreds of Jews. Hundreds are saving their skin. 3 have it here. The others are Jews in their minds. They're not Jews in their hearts. Every single Jew should have said, no, our God, who we serve and we believe and trust by faith in our hearts, says, do not bow down to idols. We cannot bow down to any images and worship them. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in a rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? What's the answer? Yeah, that's right. And again, we weren't there. I don't think they're going, yeah, we do. Yeah, you got it right, king. We refuse to bow down to your images. Now, if you are ready at the time to hear the sound of the horn, the flute, if you're ready to do it, then good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of the fiery burning furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? He's got a short memory, doesn't he? Because he goes, your God is the only God. He reveals secrets. He gave the dream and the interpretation, and he knows everything. But he so quickly forgets because it wasn't in his heart. And he just sits there and goes, I'm it. Who in the world is going to keep you from my hand to kill you? So much for elevating them. Daniel's the one that reveals the dreams, and he elevates these guys as 10 times smarter than all the other wise men. And he just so quickly changes. Is it worthwhile to care about what worldly people think about you? They can love you one day, they will hate you the next day. They will esteem you one day, and they will destroy you for your love of Jesus the next day. Don't be surprised. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. We're not going to try and argue our way out of this. We don't have to give you excuses. If that is the case, that you want to throw us in the furnace, Our God, whom we serve, is able, may or may not, to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, because he's in charge, because all things work out together for us for good, because I'm not here to just get a good life from God. He might just let us burn up in that furnace. He could kill us in that furnace. We may or may not. But he will, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. Because your hand only can control our body. Your hand can't control my soul. Our God will deliver us from you in the sense that if you kill us, we're going to go be with Jesus. You're not going to burn us up in the fiery furnace. But if not, even if God doesn't deliver us from the furnace, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. Wow. And that's what, the Bible talks about the saints during the tribulation period, the myriad of people that are going to go up into heaven who are going to be beheaded by the Antichrist. Myriads of people from every tribe and tongue and nation, they're going to do the same thing as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're going to say, Antichrist, you don't own my soul. I might have missed the rapture. I might not have listened to my Christian friends before they left. But afterwards, I gave my life to the Jesus who saved my soul. And you can do what you want, but I am going to serve Jesus. And they are going to die, according to the scriptures. So this dream was about 4 to 5 kingdoms to rule the earth, dictators, ruling by law, ruling by language and culture, ruling by the power of the sword, all these things today. The final attempt is to mix it up into one global final attempt by man to bring about man's control apart from God. Jesus comes and puts an end to that. Just before all life is destroyed according to Jesus. If I delayed any longer, there'd be no flesh left on earth. And so it's going to be a lot like Noah. Instead of God destroying it with the flood, the world with the flood, he lets man's final attempt to destroy all but just the few that are left when Jesus comes back. And he rescues our souls in the meantime. So everybody's going to make a decision who they want to serve. Who do we want to serve? I only heard a few. Who we want to serve? Amen. We want to serve Jesus. He gives us everlasting life. He's in charge. There's no stopping what's coming in this world. The Bible already said it because God's already seen it happen. And so don't be too freaked out when we see things not go the biblical way that we would like, because what it ends with is the biblical salvation of our souls when we go to be with Jesus. Amen? Let's stand.
Gloria is your name in all the earth. Ooh, you're glorious, yeah. Is your name in all the earth.